moderate this is homesick, so we're sending him our love, and that's why he's not with us. And just want to let you know that after this plenary, I'll have some closing words, and then everyone is invited to join us in Miller Hall Middle for lunch. And you can just take it and leave with it, or you can eat and stay and talk. So it's up to you. So without further ado, Lisa Hofheimer.
Hi again. I hope everybody has, I don't want to necessarily say enjoyed yourselves, but I hope it's been worthwhile and worth the weather forecasts and everything to come out like this. And again, we express our apologies that Rob Eshman couldn't be here, and we hope he's feeling better very soon. And as we go into this plenary, you know, I didn't even realize it until yesterday. I came downstairs and I was talking to Josh, and I said, you know what? We really got a diverse group of speakers here today. And I guess it wasn't necessarily intentional, but we've only had one Jewish American up on the stage. That was Joanna. We had Sharon, who obviously she's from Iran, and we have Dove, who's from the UK. And now we have Stephen Smith, who is also from the UK, and Aziza, who was born in Jordan. So this is really, how did we get here? And it really, it warms my heart that both of you are here, because I've worked with both of you in the past so much, and it just makes me happy that you two are going to have what I know will be a compelling conversation. Aziza Hassan is the executive director of Newground, a Muslim-Jewish partnership for change. Aziza's career has taken her through program management, coalition building, mediation, and conflict transformation. She's been a leader in interfaith dialogue and community building, and she even served on President Obama's Advisory Council on Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. You know, she's kind of a big deal. She's been a frequent guest on National Public Radio and other news outlets, and the New York Times recently featured a piece on Aziza and her colleague Andrea Hodos, a Jewish woman, on how they're supporting each other in a post-October 7th world. And Dr. Stephen Smith, my friend, is a scholar, a social entrepreneur, and a master storyteller with a mission to capture impactful and compelling testimonies of the Holocaust, genocide, and mass atrocity for education, research, and advocacy. Stephen is the former executive director of USC Shoah Foundation, where I worked with him for 12 years, and he transformed the Visual History Archive into digital platforms for educators, students, and scholars. He's the reason why it's all there for you to see today. And he founded the UK Holocaust Center and co-founded the Aegis Trust, recognized as the inaugural UNESCO chair on genocide education. Stephen also works globally on genocide education and memorial projects. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to my friends.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you all for joining us. And thank you to Temple Israel of Hollywood for starting us in such an important conversation. I know it's a continuation of a much larger conversation, and hopefully will continue far beyond today. We have to be able to talk about these hard things. We have to be able to talk about what hurts. We have to be able to talk about how we can figure out where we're going to build. But first, we have to understand more. And so we are grateful for our time together. We wish Rob a quick recovery, and we'll be asking each other questions for the course of our time together, knowing that each of us brings different perspectives, and that those different perspectives actually help us grow better, grow stronger, challenge each other so that we can do better together. And so to start us off, Dr. Stephen, if you could give us an idea of your personal story and how you come to this work. Like, what's at the core of it for you?
Well, thank you, Aziza. And first of all, it's so nice to meet you in person. I think we just have been in little Zoom boxes till now. We got to know each other during the pandemic on Zoom, on sessions, and it's just a pleasure to meet in person. Yeah, we only come here with ourselves. That is, we're starting from where we are all as individuals. It doesn't matter what our background, and Lisa just mentioned we come from an array of backgrounds, but we bring ourselves to everything that's happening in the world in which we live, and that's kind of where we're starting with this. I've got to go back to Israel in 1981. My first two impressions were of Israel at that time. So who is this guy, Shimon Peres, that's running for office? Because his posters were everywhere, because it was a general election when we arrived at Tel Aviv airport. My second impression was at the Kotel. I was 13 years old. I was there as a Christian family touring the Holy Land. I remember sitting there and saying, so, like, how come we come here to learn about our tradition and where it came from? And when I see a part of that, which is people praying at what used to be the temple, where Jesus of Nazareth came, according to the New Testament scriptures, at the age of 13, for what probably was the equivalent of his bar mitzvah, to this very place, how come I don't know what's happening here? And why these people are praying here? It was Erev Shabbat. Went forward 10 years, back in Israel in 1991. My brother and I were at Yad Vashem, and we went to Yad Vashem as non-Jews into this sacred space, essentially, to learn. And then while we were there, we realized this happened to the Jews, but it was not the making of the Jews. So where is everybody else on this? How come the perpetrators and the bystanders can commit this genocide and just walk away as if nothing happened? So we decided to dedicate our lives to trying to teach about the Holocaust, thinking we'd volunteer for an organization in the UK. There was no organization. And so we created the National Holocaust Center in the UK when we were in our mid-20s. While we were doing that, genocide happened in Rwanda and in Bosnia, and we realized that we were memorializing something that needed to be memorialized from 50 years prior, but the demand on us in that particular moment was, so what are you going to do as citizens of the world to speak out about these crimes? And we didn't have a really good answer to that, I have to say. And so we were the next generation that failed and became bystanders to the genocide of the Tutsi and of Srebrenica and other places. And so we created a new organization, the world's first genocide prevention organization, called the Aegis Trust, to say, how do we participate in the world in which we live, and how do we teach others how to do so? Which brings us to now, kind of. I was back at the Western Wall as probably a year last January. 30 years had gone by. I had been fighting anti-Semitism. I'd been fighting for memory. I'd been fighting for education. I'd been fighting for testimonies to be told. And every single day, 24 hours a day for 30 years, I fought and I fought and I fought. And then I left the Shoah Foundation, and I was sitting exactly where I'd sat as a 13-year-old 43 years prior. And I thought, you know, I don't want to fight anymore. I just want to be a part of this amazing people and a part of this history. My wife, Heather, came back from the wall, and I said, how were your prayers? And she said, they were good. How was yours? I said, I'm converting to Judaism. And she said, what now? And I said, yeah, because I don't have to fight. I just want to be. September the 5th this year, I went to the mikveh, converted to Judaism. Day before Yom Kippur, I had my first aliyah at Temple Beth Am. To my great surprise, Aziza, a gentleman walked into the synagogue, 96-year-old, and sat on the front row just before I was called up for my aliyah. And I went to Rabbi Kligfeld, and I said, as I was literally going up to the bima, I said, by the way, that gentleman is the last surviving member of the Bielski partisans, Aaron Bell. And he'd come to the synagogue to honor me on my conversion to Judaism. he invites Aaron Bell up to the bema, so now there's two of us standing there doing an aliyah together. And the rabbi says, do you want to do a little drash? I said, what now? He said, well, we've got to finish the Torah reading, but yes, after. And so there I was doing my first drash at the bema in Beth Am the day before Yom Kippur, and I entitled my little commentary, I'm going to fight. I'm going to fight. Because of the bravery of that man and his brothers, 40,000 Jewish people are alive today. 40,000 Jews are alive today. And so on the 12th of September, I called my little sermon, I'm going to fight. I'm going to fight for our identity, I'm going to fight for our religion, I'm going to fight for our spirituality, and if I have to, I will fight with my bare hands. And so that's what I'm prepared to do. Now, I entitled, I'll make this my final comment, I entitled my piece in the Jewish Journal straight after October the 7th, It's Time to Fight, and it has been a difficult piece to write. But I was being true to what I'd said at the bema in front of the Holy Torah on the day that I converted to Judaism as a pacifist and as a humanitarian, that sometimes we have to fight in order to be able to survive and to live. We'll come to what that means in the context of what we're talking about today, but that's been my journey so far. And you?
Thank you. Thank you for holding that spirit. I'm in and out of this fighting spirit. I'm in and out of it as the daughter of a Palestinian man who was born in Khibab, which literally means the land of many domes. It's now called Kfar Ben Nun, and it has been completely erased off the map. I say it as the daughter of a Christian woman from the Midwest who was willing to leave her siblings and loved ones and live in Amman, Jordan for 17 years until my father passed. I say it because for as long as I can remember, I've been fighting. Because these two parents kind of indoctrinated me into this idea that we can all get along. And I found myself, and I think that they didn't realize this at the time, but being the translator, translating for one, translating for the other, intentionally not translating when people were being exceptionally rude, but always fighting. And I don't want to fight anymore. I want to be. I was also at the Western Wall in September of 2022. I went on a journey to follow my grandmother's footsteps. I was really deeply inspired by Rachel Soroti, who wrote this book called We Share the Same Sky. And she follows her grandmother's footsteps during World War II. And when she was losing everything, contending with parts of her decisions and how it impacted people she loved. More than anything, this idea of survival has been a huge part of my journey. And it's like, what does it mean to travel in the footsteps of your loved ones who passed on habits of trauma that you still have to heal yourself? What does it mean to touch some of their pain from afar, to hold it, to honor it, and to still see trauma and pain in another? But more than anything, what it means for me to be is I remember being in Jerusalem in September of 2022, and I was at the Wailing Wall, and I was at the Temple Mount, and I was at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And I just remember praying and feeling something, an elevation of sorts, whatever it was. I don't want to fight anymore. I want us to see each other. That's what I want. And I am not going to sit down and say, I'm going to surrender because somebody's pain is bigger than another. It is not an oppression Olympics. We can't let that be. And so I'm here out of self-interest. I'm a Palestinian woman, also Caucasian, and I know that my family is not perfect, and I know that I love them. And I know that we have to create space for each other. Because if we can't talk about those hard things, then we're just going to keep suppressing each other and creating the conditions to be able to justify awful things. That's not who I'm going to be. And I hope that we can rise up to the occasion and say, I love my people. I love my people, that's why I'm here. And that's why we've got to find a way through this together. Because the pain is there. Yes, it is very real. And our kids deserve, my kids, your kids, we all deserve that the pain is still a part of us, yes, and we deserve the love that is possible.
And Aziza, maybe you could just share with us a little bit, how do you go about that? Because this is your professional life as well as your personal journey. How do those two things work together? How does your personal life impact your professional view, and how does your professional life impose itself on your personal life to some degree?
It's like you were talking to my husband, who has very strong opinions about all of this. I think they're one and the same. The truth is like I bring a lot of heart to my work. It's just actually part of who I am. And if anything, a lot of times people have told me, there's too much heart in what you're talking about. And I'm not going to apologize for that. But if we won't believe that I care about the people that I work with, I think it's also important to look at the self-interest piece. Because Muslims, Jews, Arabs, Black African Americans, all of the different tapestry that we are all a part of and interacting with all the time, those numbers are kind of scary. It's scary when we're talking about the expressed hatred in different places. And you are 34 times more likely to have anti-Muslim sentiment if you already have anti-Jewish sentiment. Those numbers have been true for a long time. And I see them even when we have really clear understandings that we are in a place of like where we see all the differences, we see them very well. There's a lot of other actors out there that are promoting and saying and promoting anti-Semitism. And I know it's not that they're out of pure self-interest, they also really don't like Muslims either. And so the way I come to it is it's very personal, but it's also like, what kind of world are we building? What kind of world are we building for ourselves? What kind of world are we working towards? And it's really, like when October 7th happened, I felt like my whole entire being hit the floor. We did so much incredible work, and all I could think about were the people that I cared about how they were hurting. Like, what does it mean to be there for them? And as I was reaching out to them, and still inadequately so, I was doing all these media interviews and really trying hard to convey that what happened was this massacre, this awful, like Joanna mentioned, like the denial of the rapes. That's not okay. It's not okay at all. And we have to be able to say something about it. We have to be able to say something about all the points and to hold our friends and to truly be there for them. Not to try to say, like nothing justifies it. Not 75 years of all sorts of awful things, murders and other things included. That's also part of the tapestry too. But I have to be able to hold it all. And I have to say, it comes at a pretty big expense. Like those news reports that we do, that I've been on, that Lisa talked about, that New York Times, the New York Times person followed me for a good 2.5 weeks. Phone calls, he came in person, like there was a lot that he was following, and a lot of like my own body saying, what on earth are you doing? He could totally like destroy your work. And he didn't. To his credit, he actually leaned in. And there were other news reports that we've been doing, and you pour so much into it, and you say everything that you want your friends to hear, and then a sentence gets in. It's, quite frankly, disheartening. And I'm going to keep on doing it, because I just want to be. Tell us about you.
You know, it's interesting because as October the 7th unfolded, you know, in my professional life, I am a genocide scholar. And it was very evident to me within minutes of seeing what was unfolding that we were watching a genocidal massacre. Now, as a scholar of genocide, I have very strict rules about not calling something a genocide until it's actually been through a proper court of law, until it's been, it's not, genocide is not an opinion. It's a international law that needs to be tried under specific jurisdiction. And, you know, when it comes to, just say, a homicide on the streets of Los Angeles, I don't get to decide, is that manslaughter, first-degree murder, or second-degree murder? It goes through a court of law, and a jury decides on the basis of the evidence, and the same is true of the crime of genocide. There is one thing, though, that sets the 7th of October apart, and that is that the charter of Hamas has been very clear for a very long time. It was very clear that it's a genocidal ideology behind Hamas. And so what we were seeing was the outcome of that ideology in practice. And what we know from genocides the world over time is that genocidal killers are usually quite explicit about what they intend to do and why. And that's how ultimately you're able to identify the cause and also the action that takes place. Subsequently, we've been hearing a lot about genocide on social media channels and other places in terms of Israel's actions in Gaza. You know, one thing we must be very clear about is that it's really important for those of us who care about the Middle East not to act with double standards. Israel is a nation state. It has to conduct itself in accordance with international law and is due to be held to account for any of its actions that are carried out based on the basis of law. And just because we have affinity with Israel, or just because we feel that it probably might not be committing genocide, that in its own right is not something that we can determine sitting in Los Angeles because we happen to be on X or on TikTok because somebody else says it. But it's really important, I think, for those of us who really care about that situation. In our previous session, we were talking about empathy. You know, empathy, as I was mentioning, is not empathy is not an emotion. Empathy is a skill. And one of the things that I think we tend to do is mistake the two. And say, well, because I feel strongly about this, or because I'm listening to this particular side then of it, I'm feeling very empathetic. Empathy is the ability to step outside of how you feel and to listen fully to the other person and to their experience, and to be able to understand them from their perspective, even if you don't agree with the perspective that they hold, so that you can be more fully informed in the conversation or the dialogue that you might want to establish with them. And unfortunately, we have not developed the skill of empathy much in our society. We certainly don't teach it to our children, and it's really hard to do. Really, really hard to do, because it counts most when it matters most. And what matters most in this situation is our own identity. So therefore, it's really hard to put that down and find a space to listen to others and hear them fully in their own humanity for who they are. And so I'm going to pass this back to you in a second. But for me, I want to tell you, it's been a really difficult journey. It's been a difficult journey because I kind of know too much and can analyze it too much on the one hand. On the other hand, I'm going through my own personal journey and identity, but when my kids sit in front of me and say, "Dad, I thought you were a humanitarian. Dad, I thought you taught us to listen." Dad, why can't you hold a conversation with us without being on one side of everything all the time? That's very confronting, I have to tell you. And I want to say to my kids, who are not here, but I'm going to say to them anyway, thank you for confronting me and for asking tough questions of me, as difficult as I found them, because as a result of that, I have now gone on my own learning journey and deepened my understanding and feel more ready for our conversation, Aziza, because we can only do this, I think, if we approach it with humility, because it's just too complicated otherwise. But I wanted to know a little bit how you know, as we go through this period of time in history, Aziza, how you navigate that, the sort of the international politics as well as what that means for you as an individual.
It really comes back down to what you just described. It's like that humility and that mirror, they're so critical. Because when we can hold up a mirror for each other, we start to confront some of the things that we were taking for granted that we didn't see. And we start to see dimension. I think it's being real about the things that we're not seeing, too. I was, with my friends, and we're talking, and I wasn't seeing the rapes. I named them because I didn't see them. And then I read them, and I read the articles, and I read the gruesome details, and I can't get them out of my head. Sometimes it takes a friend to say, I need you to see this. Or a kid who's asking you a tough question. Like some of the tough questions I've been getting from my kids are, Mom, is it okay to cry? I'm like, yeah, baby, it's really important for you to cry. And they're like, well, I don't. And then they're wrestling with their own resentment from different community members who make them feel like because they're holding both, or because they're holding Israeli life and because they're holding Palestinian life, that somehow they're less Palestinian. And confronting that, and it's important to, and we have to do it. And what I found that's really surprising in a really important way is that when you confront it, you see people come out of the woodwork to also help support you. And it wouldn't have happened if you didn't say it in the first place. And it takes a lot of courage to say it. But we step in, and we step in together. And then you also challenge again and say, yes, what do you call all those people in Gaza? All the people who have been killed? What do you call all the hospitals no longer being in service? What do you call the kids, like the one that is on the hospital floor that I can't get out of my head because he looks like my youngest? Or Kfir Bibas, who is still being held. And all those people, I think that's what it comes down to for me. It's the people.
Yeah,
And what it means for us to hold all those narratives, even when they're really hard to hold.
Yeah, I think it's so right. It's about humanizing it, I think. I've been quite active in trying to think about how to humanize what happened on the 7th of October. My wife Heather and I have a business that does what we call conversational video, which allows you to talk to people using technology that are not there, that you're having a conversation with. And so actually we interviewed 5 people in the Gaza envelope, 3 of whom were at the Nova Festival, 2 of whom were involved in rescuing people during that period, 1 of whom was a Druze gentleman, Israeli Muslim Druze guy who happened to be a police officer, starting his shift at 6:30 in the morning to protect, he was on the duty at the Nova Festival. He got out of his car just as the rockets began. And so we filmed them in the locations where they were throughout the day on the 7th of October in the different locations, and then asked them questions about, that experience in some detail. And that will be a film that will be launched on US campuses called 0628. And it starts with each of them 60 seconds. Who were you at 6:28? on the 7th of October 2023, where was your family? What were you doing? Who were you with? What was your life like at that moment? Just humanizing that 1 minute then before it all happens. So we were pretty immersed in those stories. And then when my kids confronted me, I realized I'd never listened to a single Palestinian talking about this experience at all. Not one. And by the way, my area of specialization is testimony, it's human stories. And I realized that I was just blocking one side of the story. So I took the time to do that. Surprising how similar we all are when facing, violence and suffering and loss and human tragedy. Yeah. It's very easy just to point the finger around the ideology, and I'm going to make it a very unequivocal comment here that Hamas is a genocidal ideology that needs to be removed. But that does not implicate everybody in that ideology, and it's important that we listen to everybody's stories, because in the humanizing of our stories is where we find each other, it's where we find the commonalities, and there's so much that we share. Even in this extremely divided situation, there's so much that we share. And I just want to think about how we can, how we can help, not just like something that's over there, but how we, Aziza, what are the methods that you use for bringing people together and humanizing the situations that we're in?
I think it's how we step into a hard situation or conversation with curiosity. Like asking the question, okay, with genocidal language, with genocidal action, like what does it mean to unpack that? What does it mean, like how do we describe? How do we lean into the very specific details of things? But how do we do it in a way that still honors the depth of the pain that we need to describe and doesn't walk away from it? And so, with the giving people space to be able to talk about it and to name the people, the individuals, the people and their families.
How do we do that when we're feeling our own pain so deeply, though?
Ah, yes. I think so. We have, self-knowing and grounding it's an essential part of it. And so sometimes we have to trust our bodies that we're just not ready for a hard conversation. And we actually have to opt in or out. And then other times when we're a little bit closer and we can opt in, like we're doing things to ground. We've been working closely with the Trauma Resource Institute. We've done a couple of different sessions with them, and they talk about how actually finding our resources, and a resource is something that calms you. Each of us is a little bit different. Like for some people, you see cats, and all of a sudden your temperature goes down a little bit. Or like other people, it's a song, or it's a prayer, or it's a child's picture, or somebody or something that helps resource you and ground you in that moment. And so you can continue with a hard conversation. But the other thing is, a commitment to step in when you don't always feel prepared, and what it means to lead in this really hard moment, because we actually need everyone to lead in this moment, to step in and say, okay, what does it mean for us to be able to talk about genocide? The hard word, to unpack it together, or what does it mean for us to be able to talk about the hard phrases? Actually, and what's beautiful about the example of the video that you talked about is that you can tell stories and you can give people the opportunity to unpack those stories, and to be able to lead in hard moments. And so there was one of the people who's gone through our program was also part of the folks who helped organize a protest not too far from Beth Am. And there was a lot of tension back and forth, and services that were stopped, and you name it. Like it was like the heightened apex of tension. And as hard as it was, there were people who were watching out for folks who were helping walk people across the streets, who were following up, like the rabbi meeting with another leader eventually and talking through things. Like, none of this stuff is easy. And sometimes we don't have any of the answers, but we know we have to show up. And that's part of the important part of what bridge building means in this moment. It's to ground yourself when you can, to make sure that if you're not that grounded, that you bring in the right person who can, and you lead into that hard conversation together. And I'm curious to hear what you, especially in leading, right, and bridging in this moment, what that has looked like for you.
Yeah, I think the first thing is that we, finding a shared language. Dov, are you here somewhere? Dov Waxman? He's around
He
somewhere.
had to go to another event.
Okay, so if you've not read Dov's book, get Dov's book and read it. Because what Dov does in his book, and if you want to get the shorthand version, go to, Rob Eshman is not here, who runs the AMARC Foundation. He was supposed to be helping us moderate this. Rob, get well. But in the meantime, I'm sending everybody to the AMARC Foundation website, where if you don't have a day to read Dov's book, you can take 20 minutes and read the top 10 questions that Dov answers on the AMARC Foundation. Why is it important for the issue of leadership is, if we're talking completely different languages about the history and the context and the terminology of the conflict, we're going to be talking straight past each other. And what Dov does really, really well is he just answers key questions that are not politically framed. They're just simply this is the context in which we are working and talking, and gives us a way to talk about difficult topics without feeling that we are conflicted or that we are being, taking a political perspective that we feel uncomfortable with. And I'm very, very grateful for Dov for writing that book. So that's the first thing, finding a shared language. Second thing is being willing to talk to the other side. In a few days, Lisa and myself and Heather are going to be in Israel. And one of the people that we'll be spending time with is a gentleman by the name of Rabbi Michael Melchior. Now, Rabbi Melchior's grandfather was the gentleman who in September 1943 delivered to the Jewish community of Copenhagen the news that they had to go home and they had to leave, and delivered that as his Rosh Hashanah service, which is go home and leave, and it resulted in the Danish Jews being saved. 2 generations later, Rabbi Melchior, former minister in the Israeli government, education minister, communities minister, spends most of his time talking to the other side. And the other side meaning including terrorist organizations. Why? Because I said this in that group a moment ago, if you don't have the bridge built before there's conflict, you aren't going to build it during conflict. You got to have that bridge in place. We talk about building bridges. Build the bridge before there is a conflict. Because otherwise, you just got a chasm and you can't cross it. And who is able to communicate to the other side? One of the people that's able, the person that built the bridge, because you know how to get across it. I also mentioned in our other group a moment ago that we know for a fact that virtually every person that has been named righteous among the nations by the State of Israel, by Yad Vashem, who rescued at least one Jewish person during the Holocaust, knew somebody Jewish before World War II. It's a basic criterion of being righteous among the nations. By the way, it's not a qualification that Yad Vashem checks. It's just a fact. It's the people that made, during times of peace, the effort to know people who were not like themselves, who turned out to be the heroes during the times of war. And so essentially, it's kind of like, I think that's where the leadership's got to come. It's be prepared to be vulnerable, be prepared to open yourself and get to know people who are not like yourself, and accept their humanity, because then essentially we can find each other in times like this. Here we are.
Here we are.
Here we are.
Yes, so that you don't, because you won't be able to jump over the chasm. It will just be a chasm. So to close us out, I'm wondering if you have there's one nugget of wisdom you'd like to leave us with, and then I'll do the same.
Ooh. I think the nugget of wisdom is, it comes back to this issue about humility and vulnerability. When we're challenged, when we're fearful, when we see things are not going the way that challenge us, literally put fear into us because we are seeing anti-Semitism on the streets of Los Angeles, or Jews being murdered in the state of Israel, like in cold blood, our instinct, obviously, is to go to protect ourselves or to draw opinions or to... It's the hardest thing, I think, to be vulnerable and humble in the face of that. I'm still practicing it. I don't know if I'm doing well at it, but I know that without it, I won't survive this, and I'm not sure that we will. And so to clarify, when I said at the beginning about fighting, it wasn't about the physical fight. There is a state of war, and decisions have been made about warfare, and they have to conduct that in the context of international law. I mean, fighting for our values, fighting for who we are, fighting to stay grounded in the middle of this, and knowing that somebody said to me, "Stephen, you converted to Judaism right now? What a terrible decision." And I said to them, actually, no, you know what? Try fighting anti-Semitism from outside of the Jewish community for 30 years. That's lonely. Guess what? I just got 15 million new friends. And I have never felt more secure in my whole life because I have you and we have one another.
Beautifully said. You know, I think part of when Rabbi Michelle made the ask for me to come today, I was like, I'm kind of not Jewish, but kind of shouldn't be on this panel. But I knew it was important to come. It was important to come because you're not alone. You're not alone. If there's one thing that you walk away with today, I want you to know that you're not alone. We're here. It's going to be hard. And I've seen the power of Muslims and Jews standing up side by side. I've seen the power of people taking on what they see as expressed hatred and shifting the narrative. And we heard earlier about there was a lot of discussion on Iran. There's one of the things that our high school students did a couple of years ago was they told the story of Abdul Hussein Sardari and Ibrahim Muradi. I believe Muradi, actually, his son, is a congregant here of blessed memory. And they told the story about Muradi being in relationship with Sardari and saying, you've got to help people. You've got to help the Iranian Jews at the time of World War II. You've got to get them out. And so it was a story of trying and failing and almost giving up and pushing forward and trying again. That was relationship at its best. And that's the story that our kids created in a film and have been sharing and screening and talking about. And I think that's the kind of thing that we can do right here, right now. And the Sardari Muradi story is also captured in a video called The Lion of Iran. I was talking to Gina Naharai. Gina talks about how that story of a Muslim saving Jews during the Holocaust changed the script. And it's an important piece of changing the script because then it's about, oh yes, that's our people. We take care of each other. So let that be our story moving forward, taking care of each other.
Thank you, both of you. I want to share a little thanks. I want to talk about bridges, and I want to talk about crying. Thanks to Kenny Clark, who has been on sound and video this whole time. Thank you for Rabbi Mari Chernow for believing in us and allowing us to have this day and make it happen. Thank you to Leah Grossman, our Director of Community Engagement, who really really spearheaded everything from planning to coordinating to setups to absolutely everything. Please walk up to Leah and thank you. And thank you to Lisa Hoffheimer for putting together with our committee all of these different panels and for brainstorming this whole idea. Okay, bridges and crying. I want to take us back again, forgive me, to October 4th. October 4th, Aziza and I had a meeting. Aziza and I were planning a trip to Israel and the West Bank. It was going to be half of the people from Newground, half of her Muslim constituents from Newground, and it was going to be the other half Jewish constituents from Temple Israel of Hollywood. That was October 4th. We then had a meeting set for October 9th, Monday morning, to finish up our itinerary and start publicizing a trip to the West Bank in Israel. It was going to be a dual narrative trip with an Israeli guide and a Palestinian guide. We were not going to do one narrative. And then October 7th happened. And I remember that Monday when we were supposed to meet, I emailed Aziza and said, I can't even breathe. I'm sorry, I can't talk to you. And it took me a few days, and eventually we did reach out to one another. Aziza reached out to me right away. It took me a while. And I shared my fury and my disgust and my anger. And she held me. And our conversations have continued, which leads me to tears. Those of you who know me know that I'm a crier. And also, I'm not alone. So there's a beautiful page in the Talmud. It's Hagiga 4b and 5a. And it's a series of examples of rabbis crying. And I just want to share with you the last examples on the page. So Rabbi Asi, he's one of the criers. And he cites a verse in Lamentations that says, "Lest him put his mouth in the dust, perhaps there may be hope." And he says, really, we have to put our mouth in the dust, and only perhaps there will be hope? And then he quotes another verse. Seek righteousness, seek humility, and perhaps you will find shelter on the day of the Lord. And again he says, really? Only perhaps? And then a friend puts his arm around him. And Rav Ami says, there's another verse. Hate evil, love good, establish justice in the gates, and perhaps the God of hosts will be gracious. And they look at each other and they go, really? Perhaps? That's it? And then the Talmud piece ends. And the Talmud piece says that yes, it is only perhaps. Because we don't do these things for reward. We do these things because they're the right things to do. And then Rav teaches that anyone who experiences God hiding God's face, it's called Hester Panim in Hebrew. Anyone who experiences God's hiding God's face, that person is part of the Jewish community. And then they ask, well, why is God hiding God's face? Is it because God's angry at us and is punishing us? Is it because God's fed up with us and just needs a break? And they answer. And Rav says, God hides God's face because God needs to turn God's face from us to hide. And why is God hiding? Because God is crying privately. So your son's tears, my tears, our tears, maybe they're blessings. Maybe they're ways that we can build bridges to God and to one another. Maybe there are ways that we can respect one another's space and know that sometimes we just need to pull back, but we only pull back in order to then be able to build those bridges and to walk across them with one another. Thank you for being here.